Welcome to Formula One Legends. In this brand new series, we're going to be opening the history books of Formula One and taking a look back at some of the greatest ever drivers to grace our sport. And where better place to start than with Ayrton Senna, one of the most famous but also one of the best Formula One drivers of all time. 3 times world champion, driving for teams such as Lotus, Williams and even McLaren. Senna stole the hearts of Formula One fans across the globe, fellow teams and even fellow drivers, on the way to building one of the fiercest rivalries in Formula One history with McLaren and Prost. Sadly, Ayrton is no longer with us and is a figure in motorsport we still all miss to this day. However, I personally would like to take this opportunity to explore all the great things he did for racing, all the amazing things he was able to do for safety, and the legacy he has left in the world of motorsport. So I hope you're all sitting comfortably, have got a spare 10 minutes to hand. This is the journey of Ayrton Senna. Welcome to Formula One Legends. Senna was born on the 21st of March 1960, Sao Paulo, Brazil. His full name, Ayrton Senna da Silva, after his father Milton da Silva, a land and factory owner in the heart of Sao Paulo. The Senna name itself actually came from his mother's side of the family, Nide Senna da Silva. Senna also had an older sister, Viviane, and a younger brother, Leonardo. At school, Senna was highly athletic, excelling in gymnastics and other sports, but developed an interest in motor racing and cars at the age of just 4, and by the time he was 11 years old, was driving the family Jeep around his father's farm. At 13, he made his karting debut, and on his first ever race weekend, qualified on pole. Unfortunately for Senna, he never saw the checkered flag after a mild misdemeanour with another competitor late on in the race, but it was proof that talent was there, and this was a child that had the raw speed to maybe make it to Formula One one day. His first official championship was the 1977 South American Karting Series, which he went on to win in his first ever season. For 1978, Senna moved over to the World Karting Championship, and in 1981, Senna moved to England to begin his single-seater racing career. Competing in the Formula Ford 1600 for the team Van Diemen in 20 races, Senna won 12, 3 pole positions, room to improve, but in his first ever season in single-seater racing, winning the championship, it's not too bad. For the following season, he moved to the Russian Green Team, Formula Ford 2000, a step up, but that was still fine. 21 wins in 28 races, and the qualifying record got much better, 15 pole positions this time round, also winning at the first time of asking. 1983, things only got better. British Formula 3 for the West Surrey Racing Team, 20 races, 12 victories, 15 pole positions, once again, first place overall for Senna. He also competed in his first ever Macau Grand Prix, and you guessed it, fastest lap, pole position, and the race win. Senna's more than impressive performances throughout his junior career caught the eye of more than one of the world's great motor racing teams. He impressed so much so that in 1983, at the end of the year, he tested for Williams, McLaren, Brabham and Toleman. And for the 1984 season, it would be Toleman that gave Senna his chance in Formula One. Senna had received contracts from Lotus, Ron Dennis's McLaren and Bernie Ecclestone's Brabham team, but they were all to test in 1984 with a long-term view of racing. Toleman offered Grand Prix hands-on experience, and my goodness, did Senna impress in that first season. His first race came in the first race of the season, Rio de Janeiro, his home Grand Prix. Qualified P17, not the best, but retired on lap 8 after a mechanical failure. but he didn't have to wait long for his first ever points in Formula 1, only his second ever race, the South African Grand Prix at Kyalami. Senna finished a more than impressive 6th place, something he was able to replicate in round 3 of the championship in Belgium. He wouldn't have to wait long either until his first ever podium, only a few races later at Monaco, of all places. Not only was it at Monaco, wet weather conditions in your first ever season of Formula 1, and not only that, on lap 19 passed Niki Lauda, former Formula 1 world champion, for 2nd place, and was ultimately hunting down the lead of a certain Alain Prost in a very, very quick McLaren car. And whilst we will never know what would have happened, Senna was catching Prost. The race was ultimately stopped thanks to the torrential rain, but Senna was catching. Ultimately, 2nd place in only what was your 6th ever Formula 1 Grand Prix, only the 3rd time he reached the checkered flag. Not bad. He also scored 2 further podiums in that season, a 3rd place in Great Britain and a 3rd place in Portugal at the end of the year. Ultimately, 9th in the standings, 13 points for a struggling Toleman team who themselves would only compete in one more full season of Formula 1 in 1985 and ultimately would leave the sport. But Senna's 3 podiums in 1984 were Toleman's only ever 3 podiums, and Senna's performances were so good in that season, for 1985 he moved teams, moved further up the grid to Lotus, a team that desperately wanted Senna to drive for them in 1984 to replace Nigel Mansell, future world champion, but ultimately, thanks to a tobacco sponsor and their relationship with Mansell, they were unable to do so. But 1985 will do, alongside Elio De Angelis, a very strong driver pairing that ultimately should give the team a good chance at the title. And they gave it a good shot. Senna, in his 2nd race for the team, pole position in Portugal. In wet conditions, he converted that pole position to his 1st ever victory. Points followed in San Marino, but it wouldn't be until round 10 in Austria where Senna would score his 2nd podium of the season in 2nd place. 3rd places followed in the Netherlands and Italy, rounds 11 and 12, and he got his 2nd ever win in Formula 1, again in wet conditions, this time at Spa-Francorchamps. Senna finished the season a very impressive P4, only 5 points in front of teammate De Angelis, but the relationship between the two had soured over the course of the season. De Angelis, who'd spent several years at the team, desperately wanted to be number 1, but felt the team were favouring Senna over the course of the year, and ultimately left the team at the end of 1985, moving to Brabham for the 1986 season. Senna would remain at Lotus in the John Player Special livery for 1986, scoring 2 more victories, again in the 2nd round of the season, this time in Spain, and his 1st ever win in America, this time in Detroit. Podiums in Brazil for his 1st home podium in the 1st race of the year, Belgium 2nd place, Germany 2nd place, Hungary 2nd place, a much more consistent season. Finished 4th once again in the standings, but scored 55 points compared to 38 the season prior. 1987 would be Senna's last year in Lotus, a more radical looking livery this time around, bright yellow camel sponsorship, wins his 1st win in Monaco, another win in Detroit, 1st podium in San Marino, podiums in Great Britain, Germany, Hungary, Italy and Japan, a 3rd place in the standings. Senna's performances at Lotus were proving him to be one of the best on the grid, but Lotus's questionable reliability, especially in the 1985 and 6 seasons, and with Lotus's Honda partnership coming to an end at the end of 1987, Senna decided the time for a move was now. And with both Ron Dennis and Alain Prost's approval, Senna moved to McLaren for 1988, starting a rivalry that would last 5 seasons and one of the most synonymous and fiery rivalries in Formula 1 history. The 1988 season, Senna's 1st at McLaren, went pretty well. 15 wins for the team in 16 races, the highest win percentage of all time in Formula 1 for a Grand Prix team. Not only that, Senna won his first World Championship in 1988, beating out Alain Prost, the far more experienced teammate, in a season where 36 drivers competed in at least one race in the season. But the true rivalry was at McLaren, between the two drivers fighting it out for the titles. Senna's 8 victories, to add insult to injury to Prost, became the highest of any driver in a season, beating the record of 7 held by Jim Clark and Alain Prost in 1984. With Senna also beating the record for the most pole positions in a season, taking 13 out of the 16 total in the season. Not bad at all. But the rivalry didn't just spark from victories and fighting for the title. There were moments on track that were a little bit tense for McLaren viewers and McLaren leadership. One of the more prominent incidents at the Portuguese Grand Prix at the beginning of the race, the two fighting into turn 1, squabbling for position, ultimately Senna, pushing Prost arguably into the wall, had to apologise to the Frenchman. But the damage was done not necessarily to the cars, but certainly to the relationship between the two drivers. Despite this, McLaren took the gamble. They kept the same lineup for 1989. Sensible, 2 of the best drivers in the world, but would Ron Dennis be able to keep a lid on the rivalry between the two of them? Well, they won the championship again. This time it was Prost that came out on top, with Senna in P2. But that doesn't really tell the whole story. The rivalry, for sure, intensified over the season. Psychological warfare, if you will. Ron Dennis stating after the French Grand Prix that the two engines between the two drivers from Honda's side of things were inconsistent, and perhaps that Senna had the better of the two. At the start of the San Marino Grand Prix, the two drivers were enthralled in a battle. There was a restart later on in the race. Prost claimed that Senna overtook him illegally. And of course, who could forget the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix, the two teammates colliding at the final chicane of the circuit. Senna ultimately coming out on top, being pushed away, being allowed to go, but at the end of the Grand Prix, disqualified by the FIA. Controversial at the time, but the records say Prost, world champion in 1989. 1990, Senna stayed at McLaren, but he had a new teammate. Prost, out the door, moved to Ferrari, one of McLaren's big rivals in Formula 1. Did it go Prost's way? Did it go Senna's way? That was one of the big stories going into the season. Ultimately, it went the way of Senna. The two of them, once again, in the title hunt, down to the wire. The two of them, first and second. Senna finishing the season on 78 points. Victories in the USA, Monaco again, Canada, Germany, Belgium and Italy ultimately left him 5 points in front of the French rival. But Senna, 78 points, Prost 73, Nelson Piquet in third, 44. Senna and Prost truly dominated this period of Formula 1. No matter what car they were in, these two were the two to beat. And the rivalry once again into 1991, Senna still at McLaren, Prost still at Ferrari, but this time Senna, once again world champion, winning the first 4 rounds of the season. Prost was down in 5th, didn't win a single race the entire year. And actually Senna's closest rival was Nigel Mansell in the Williams, who also won his fair share of Grand Prix, 5 over the season. So Senna now 3 world championships, truly established in the world of Formula 1. Not only that, he had proved himself a master, not only at overtaking, not only at qualifying, but in the rain, no one could beat Senna. 1992, still at McLaren. The legacy was really starting to build. But the on-track performances of the team, well, took a turn for the worst. It was Williams that had improved the year prior, Mansell in second. But after active suspension and a revolutionary car design, the team were unstoppable. Mansell claiming his first ever Drivers' World title, teammate Riccardo Patrese in P2, Michael Schumacher 3rd, Ayrton Senna in 4th. Where was Alain Prost? Well, at the end of the 1991 season, after Senna claiming his 3rd world title, Prost walked away from Ferrari, Prost walked away from Formula 1. But don't you worry, that was not the end of the Alain Prost-Ayrton Senna rivalry, because in 1993, the year after Mansell won his title, Prost returned to Williams. The fight in the title was once again between Frenchman Alain Prost, Brazilian Ayrton Senna. Wins went back and forth, Prost winning the first race of the season, then Senna winning the next 2 in Brazil and Britain. Then the next 2 went to Prost winning in San Marino and Spain, then back to Senna in Monaco. Prost won the next 4, then Damon Hill started to win the first few races in Formula 1, 3 for him in Hungary, Belgium and Italy. With a few rounds to go, Senna was a 3rd place in Portugal, won the final 2 races in Japan and Australia. But after Alain Prost's 3 consecutive 2nd places in the last 3 rounds of the season, in his return and final season of Formula 1, Prost and Williams were world champions. Senna, beaten by his arch rival, beaten by his now arch rival team. McLaren had struggled for 1992 and 1993. The relationship between Ron Dennis and Senna had started to deteriorate, and ultimately, for 1994, Senna would move to Williams. Sadly, Senna would only compete in 3 races in 1994 for the Williams team. After retiring in the first 2 rounds in Brazil and Japan, Senna passed away in a tragic accident during the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix, his last in Formula 1, one of the worst days in Formula 1 history. After the passing of both Ronald Ratzenberger and Ayrton Senna at the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix, Formula 1 had to change quick. Safety need to improve. And that's exactly what Sir Sid Watkins and the FIA and safety teams in Formula 1 did. Improve crash barriers, redesign tracks, higher crash safety standards, turned down engines, and the Imola circuit itself altered at the Tamburello corner for 1995. But that still didn't rectify the fact that Formula 1 had lost a legend. Formula 1 would never be the same. And despite outpours from not only the Formula 1 community, but sporting community itself, the Brazilian national football team dedicating their World Cup victory in 1994, we had Schumacher and other drivers during the 1994 season commemorating Senna during their Grand Prix victories. Williams, to this day, carry the Senna S on all of their Formula 1 cars. The Sao Paulo circuit has the Senna S corner, turns 1, 2 and 3. But Formula 1 lost a hero on that day. And ultimately Senna, a driver who felt the presence of God every time he raced in Formula 1, passed away doing what he loved, passed away racing in Formula 1. 162 Grand Prix, 41 victories, 80 podiums, and to this very day, only 2 drivers have beat his record for a whopping 65 pole positions. One, Michael Schumacher, 7 times world champion. The other, Lewis Hamilton. His idol, Ayrton Senna. Senna will never ever be forgot in the world of motorsport. There's a reason that to this day, Senna is regarded as the best of all time. And there's a reason why the yellow, green and blue crash helmet remains the most iconic helmet in Formula 1 history. Senna is a legend of Formula 1, and it's the perfect place to start our Formula 1 journey through history. Thank you all so much for watching. And if you would like to know more about Formula 1 history over the coming weeks and months, and potentially could keep you busy while other things might not be happening. The subscribe button is down below, and I would love to know who you would like to see in the next episode of Formula One Legends. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.